This is why you should always trust your gut. In the 1970s, a young couple decided to go for a late-night hike in the woods. A couple minutes into their walk, and the man remembers thinking something's not right. He tells his girlfriend, but they just decide to ignore it and keep going, until he steps on something that felt really soft, like it was alive. Before he has a chance to see what he stepped on, they hear all this rustling in the bushes next to them, and they bolt. Years later, that couple turns on the TV, and a death row inmate who's about to be executed is being interviewed. And they ask him, was there ever a time that you were almost caught red-handed? He responded, yes, one time. I was in the woods, and a couple walked through, and the man actually stepped on the body of a girl I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away. They didn't see me. That couple had run into one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy. This is why you should always lock your doors. A junior in high school was home alone working on a paper while his parents were out to dinner. All night he sits with his back to his door, sitting at his desk with his noise-canceling headphones on. Around 11 o'clock he takes his headphones off at the same time his parents are returning to the house, and he hears his mom from downstairs yell, "Hey Adrian, what happened?" Confused, he runs downstairs and sees right away what she's looking at. Muddy footprints all over the rug. He tells her, "I didn't leave my desk." And then they realize someone must have broken in. They look at the footprints and there's none leaving the house. They're worried someone's still in the house, so they run into the garage, terrified, call the police. Police arrive and they don't find anyone in the house, but they do make a chilling discovery upstairs. The police bring them to the kid's bedroom door, which had been left open all night, and they point to the message written on it in Sharpie. This is the actual transcript of what was written on his door. Which means for nearly 2 hours, someone stood in this kid's doorway watching him. This is why you should never open your door for strangers. In 2013, a woman let her dog out to use the bathroom one more time before bed. After only a few minutes, she starts hearing scratching on her door, which is typically the sound her dog makes when he's ready to come in. But it just seemed way too soon for him to be done being outside. So she decides to look through the peephole to make sure it really is her dog. But what she sees is terrifying. A deranged-looking man is right outside her door, staring intently at her door handle, waiting for it to turn open. As she's looking in horror, unable to do anything, he starts scratching at the door as hard as he can, never leaving his gaze from the door handle. She manages to stifle a scream, she backs away and realizes her dog is still outside. So she goes to the side window, but there's no sign of her dog, and so she goes back to the door to see if maybe the man's moved. He hasn't moved, his mouth is open, and he's staring directly at the peephole. Then he turns around and walks away. With the man gone, she discovers her dog unharmed, his leash had just been cut. But that means he had a knife. This is why you should always check under your bed for monsters. In 2012, a young woman who is on the phone with her boyfriend walks downstairs to the lobby of her apartment building, collects her mail, and then heads back up to her room. She sits on her bed to start sifting through the mail when she drops her phone and it falls under the bed. She lies down on the ground to try to reach her arm out to grab her phone when she notices something horrible underneath her bed. A man is lying underneath her bed with his back to her. He's in the fetal position. She manages not to scream. She grabs her phone and says to her boyfriend, "Hey, I gotta go shower, I'll call you back." And she quickly runs into the bathroom, locks the door, turns on the shower, and then jumps out her first floor window. Once she's safely across the street, she calls the police, who quickly arrive, and they go inside and they come out with a deranged, skinny-looking man. Before they take him away, one of the officers walks over to her with a very grim look on his face. He looks at her and he just says, "We found him standing outside of your bathroom holding a knife. He was waiting for you." Let this be a reminder that there really are monsters out there. In 2007, a woman living right near a prison in California got home late one night and went right to bed. Around midnight, she woke up to footsteps on her first floor, assumed it was her roommate, so she goes downstairs to say hi. She yells out to her roommate, who doesn't say anything, and then in walks this giant man who she doesn't recognize. She runs upstairs, jumps in her closet into the crawl space, and hides. As she's helplessly tucked away in this little crawl space, trying not to make any sound, all she hears is this giant man sprinting around her house, running into walls, flipping furniture, and screaming in frustration because he can't find her. Finally, after several hours, she slowly opens the crawl space back up, crawls out, and gets her phone off the nightstand and calls police. As she's telling the police her story, she describes the person who had broken in, and they stop her and say, "Ma'am, go back in the crawl space and stay there. We'll be there as soon as we can." It turned out a 6'11" convicted murderer had escaped the prison and was still on the loose. This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open. She's like, I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either. Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house. And so he jokingly asks her, you ever see any ghosts walking around your attic? Her face got completely serious, and she's like, as soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening. So we investigated, and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years. Believe it or not, this is a well-documented true story. In 1947, an American ship picked up a horrifying distress signal coming from an unidentified vessel. The first transmission was all officers, including the captain, are dead. The next transmission was the whole crew is dead. The last transmission was I die, and then silence. The Americans trace the signal back to a ship that's drifting off in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They quickly assemble a rescue team who boards the ship. They find the entire crew has perished in the exact same position. They are on their backs with their hands up as if fighting with some unseen force, and they look like this. There was no physical damage to the bodies or to the ship itself. However, even though it was 100 degrees outside, it was 40 degrees on the ship, and the bodies were rapidly decomposing. As soon as they tie up the ship to tow it in, it explodes, and then it sinks. To this day, no one knows what happened inside of that ship. Some say it was a chemical leak, others aren't so sure. This is why you should be very careful who you talk to online. A 16-year-old girl was home with her mom when she got a disturbing text message from a boy she had recently met on Snapchat. He told her he was right outside of her house, but when she went to look, no one was there. Frightened, she decides to sleep in her mom's room that night, and right before she goes to bed, she gets another text from the boy that just says, I'm in your house. She shows her mom, who immediately searches the whole house, checks every door, turns on every light. There's no one there. So even though they're creeped out, they go back to bed. The next morning, she gets up and she goes back to her bedroom and immediately feels like she's being watched. She checks in her closet, looks behind her door, there's no one there. Then she noticed that the shoe boxes she normally kept perfectly arranged next to her bed had been moved. So she crouches down to put them back in order, and then out of the corner of her eye, she notices something. The boy who was texting her was under her bed. Remember, your Amazon Alexa is always listening. In 2018, a girl named Alexa came home to her apartment to find her creepy stalker landlord in her kitchen. She screams and threatens to call the cops, and he just smiles and says, I was just checking in on you, and leaves. Feeling totally sketched out, she spends the next few hours down the hall in her friend's apartment before finally going back to her room to go to bed. That night, she woke up to her Amazon Alexa responding to someone in the room. It said, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Did you say I'm watching you? The girl instantly turns on her lights and looks around, but no one's there. So she unplugs Alexa and is about to go back to sleep when she hears what sounds like a man grunting in her closet. As she's staring at her closet, her Alexa turns back on.